One of the biggest frustrations that boys and young men have is that everyone talks about them, but nobody talks with them. Conversations about masculinity should be joyous.
How do we communicate anger? How do we receive rejection? How do we give and receive the word no? We wonder why society is so broken, but we don't teach them.
You have to approach masculinity through an intersectional lens. Social class, faith, sexuality, disability, neurodiversity, culture, all of these things hugely impact the way we view masculinity. The Andrew Tate phenomenon, everyone keeps telling them what it means to be a man, imposing and dictating ideas about masculinity. These conversations were actually driving young men towards the very ideologies that we want to protect them from.
There's so many positive men in society, but where's the visibility of that?
The manosphere speaks to boys. They need better voices, but we need to look at the way they do it and actually almost hijack that, but with better messaging.
On today's episode of Minds of Men, I am joined by Mike Nicholson from Progressive Masculinity. So for 18 years, Mike worked as an English teacher, and he decided to transition into working with boys and young men, actually looking at things around identity, masculinity, and self-worth. Mike, great to have you here.
Pleasure to be here, Christian. Thanks very much for having me, mate.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure. Now, we've known each other for a couple of years now, and I remember you actually had me as a guest on your show a long time ago, talking around sex and porn and how that actually affects boys and men generally. So it's amazing to actually see how your business has grown, how your work with boys and young men has grown as well, and just what you're seeing day to day. So I really wanted to share that just to actually show people what awesome stuff is actually going on when all we ever really see and hear is all the rubbish and all the negativity in society. So yeah, really excited for today's episode.
Yeah, thank you so much, mate. And it is true, like everything you see and hear around masculinity, boys and men, it's so negative, it's so pessimistic. And I think one of the things that our work does is show that the hope and the joy and the beauty of this work and what it can mean to be a man and working with boys and young men on the shop floor and how amazing it can be.
Yeah, 100%. And there's so many narratives out there, aren't there, around this is what a man should be, this is what a husband, a father, a son, a boy. There's so many models of masculinity and right and wrong. And it's so easy for people to just be put into like one or two or three camps and to really reduce something down. But in a world of like 8 billion people, there's so many different models of masculinity and nuances around what a man can be. And just exploring that with boys must be absolutely phenomenal. Because obviously I work with adults and work with men, and I've been in lots of different spaces. And I see the power of just bringing people together, creating a safe container and giving men permission to open up around those things. So I can only imagine what it must be for boys and adolescents.
Oh, mate, it's absolutely amazing. And I think the mental image that people have of this work is of a plucky facilitator going into braving the lion's den. It's this very deficit-based approach. When people find out that I'm not a teacher anymore, and they find out what I do, even though I've been doing it for a long time, I get these kind of weird looks like, oh, you must be very brave. Almost like kind of patronizing, because they assume it's this really difficult thing where we're battling against the boys. And it's not that at all. It's actually like what you said a minute ago. It's helping boys realize they've got the agency to design the man that they want to be. And we don't impose masculinity. We don't say this is what it means to be a man. That's so arrogant. Who am I? Who are you? Who's anyone to tell anyone what it means to be a man? What we say to boys is there's 4 billion different ways to be a man. And we're here to help you find that path and give you that agency and that space and that freedom to design this wonderful man.
Yeah, 100%. And it's that similar narrative, isn't it, that men don't talk or boys don't talk, and it's absolute rubbish. It's complete BS. As soon as you give somebody permission and meet somebody where they're at and don't try and intellectualize something, speak from a place of lived experience and something that you say about being real with each other, I absolutely love that phrasing and love that delivery of what allows somebody to feel safe enough to open up and to respond.
Yeah, I mean, our workshops always go the same way. First off, the boys are really hesitant, quite defensive, sometimes even a little bit aggressive, because they believe that masculinity is going to be approached from a deficit-based perspective. No, they don't hear the word masculinity without the word toxic attached. So they think we've been brought in to attack them. So they're a little bit edgy. After about 20 minutes, you can see them start to lighten up, and you hear little whispers like, this is actually well better than I thought it was going to be. Little things like that. And then after about an hour, you can't shut them up because they've got so much to say. They realize that they're safe to say it, that they're not going to get shamed. We do challenge, and it's important. We say to the boys, it's really important that we learn how to challenge each other in a way that's healthy, in a way that doesn't escalate, in a way that isn't kind of pride or dominance based. But that's not the same as shaming and humiliating. That is not going to happen in this room.
Yeah, beautiful. What comes to mind as you say that is every single emotion that we have is valid, and it is trying to show us something, tell us something, communicate something. It's simply the expression of that emotion. How is that coming across? Is it coming across in a mature, healthy, articulate way? Is it coming across in an aggressive way or a dysfunctional way? And I think it might have been you, or definitely somebody similar in this men's space that I've been working with and in contact with. It's this idea of what is available to us and what permission do we have to access the full spectrum of our emotions and how that's being communicated. But ultimately, I think as a society, we don't know how to receive the emotions of boys and men. There's so much social conditioning around it's okay to be dominant, it's okay to be aggressive, it's okay to cry at, say, football matches or funerals, but then that's it. So what are the permissions that we need to be able to feel that? And where do we have other men modeling that in society? Because there's so many amazing men across society at every level, regardless of demographic or religion or culture or country. It's simply that we don't have visibility of them, and that so many young boys don't have access to these men to be looking up to them as mentors or teachers or role models.
Yeah, I mean, this male normative alexithymia, this idea that we struggle to put our emotional experiences into words, the main reason for that is because boys experience this vast range of emotions, but they don't know how to recognize what these emotions are. They don't know how to articulate them. When they do articulate them, other boys don't know how to hold space for that. They feel awkward. They feel like they've got to laugh or try and fix, that solution-based thinking. I've got to fix this for my mate. And just showing them like, this is how we talk about loneliness, anxiety, love, joy. And when somebody says it, here's how we receive it in a way that is supportive and makes them feel seen and heard. And when you kind of coach them, I mean, maybe I approach this from a very teacher point of view. Like, I would not expect someone to walk into one of my English lessons and be able to master a skill, lesson one. We have to break that skill down. We have to teach it to them. We have to give them modeled examples. We have to give them very low stakes attempts, which we then feed back so they can develop and improve. We don't approach emotional literacy as a skill. We just say boys don't like to talk. They'll express themselves in another way. Boys are great because they just punch each other and then get it over with. These really kind of lazy assumptions about boys and men. They do experience these emotions. They just don't recognize them, don't know how to articulate them, and don't know how to receive them. But when you create that space, they actually really enjoy it, and they're very good at it as well.
Yeah, 100%. As you say that, I just think about how the word emotional intelligence or communication is dubbed a soft skill. And for me, it's the most fundamental skill that we can develop, but we don't teach it. We don't educate around what that looks like. How do we communicate our emotions? How do we communicate anger? How do we receive rejection? How do we give and receive the word no? What's it like to establish a boundary? What happens when somebody oversteps a boundary? How do we course correct and actually have a level of self-care and self-worth and all these things? We wonder why society is so broken, but we don't teach them.
Yeah, and even worse, we socially code it as a female trait, or it's coded as a feminine trait. And then, as boys are desperately trying to kind of look for their masculine identity, they'll push back against anything that is seen as feminine, because to them, anything that's feminine must not be therefore be masculine. And it's a bit like you said earlier, though, that there are so many men, amazing men out there in the world that are modeling emotional literacy and emotional intelligence. And that's very different to when I was growing up. Sports, high-profile sporting figures and popular culture figures were not coming out talking about their mental health when I was growing up, and yet they are now. So a lot of the work is kind of connecting them to these people who maybe have low visibility in their lives because they're not shocking, they're not the big social media personality, but these guys are out there. So if we can help connect our boys and young men to these guys, that's a big part of it.
Yeah, 100%. What was your main driver in getting into this work?
I think I was always really interested in it. Growing up in the Northwest in Bury, which is kind of your classic northern deindustrialized working class town, there was very rigid kind of codes and scripts around what it meant to be a man. And I lived a performance of what I thought I was supposed to be for quite a long time. I was never maybe brave enough, or I didn't have the strength of personality to push back against that. So I lived a version of masculinity that made me really, really unhappy. And then when I became a teacher, I worked at the school that I went to as a pupil. I was a teacher there for a long time, and I saw boys from the same neighborhoods performing the same masculinities with the same kind of negative influences on, or sorry, impacts on their mental health, their relationships, their academics, everything. And this, it really, looking at it from an adult perspective, this act of self-sabotage for these amazing young men, that's what really got me into it. So it started for me as a lunchtime drop-in club. So I just said to this group of boys, said, lads, feel free to come into my classroom at lunchtime, bring your dinner. There's no lesson, there's no PowerPoint. We'll talk about whatever you want to talk about. We'll slightly relax the school rules so that you can be a little bit more honest. And that's really how it grew. As you can imagine, everybody laughed and said, lads want to be out playing football. We're not going to come in a room with you at lunchtime and talk about their emotions. And within about 2 months, we actually had a queue of lads down the corridor trying to get into this room. So
Amazing.
we then had to do two separate ones, one for the older boys and one for the younger boys, because some of the stuff the older lads wanted to talk about, not appropriate maybe for the younger boys. And that's really what got me started. So I went to the head teacher and I said, listen, some of our most high tariff lads are coming in. They're saying these things. They're realizing they're not on their own. They're gaining a lot of confidence and support from it. Wouldn't it be great if we could do something like this whole school? And the head teacher was brilliant, really lovely guy called Adam. He was my ex-history teacher when I was at the school. I loved him as a teacher, loved him as a boss, loved him as a man. And he said, yeah, Mike, what we're going to do is I'll take you off timetable, 2 lessons a week, look at the research, connect with the thought leaders, put together a program for us, and you can start to run it in the school.
Phenomenal. Yeah, that's so amazing to hear. It really, really is. As you were saying that, what came up to me is when I was a kid in school, and I would have absolutely loved a space like that. Again, from being a teenager and a child, not really feeling like I fit in, kind of getting bullied, not really feeling very academic, not feeling like I fit anywhere. The idea of having a space like that just must be life-changing. It genuinely must be life-changing when boys can actually have access to other boys in a safe space, and older adults as well who are willing to give them that time of day.
Yeah, and so many of our lads don't have access not only to spaces but to intergenerational spaces. I think we've lost a lot of those in our culture. But I think one of the key things about these spaces is very early on, we realize that they need to be co-created. We can't just come in and say, this is what I think we should be talking about. Like, one of the biggest frustrations that boys and young men have is that everyone talks about them, but nobody talks with them. Like, they don't feel their voices. They're not key stakeholders in conversations that are about them. And that makes them incredibly frustrated. They feel disenfranchised and marginalized. Once they feel that, they're more likely to gravitate towards other voices who maybe don't have their best interests at heart. So very early on, I went down the method of co-creation, saying, lads, this is what the research says we should be talking about, but what's big in your life? What's going on with you? What should we be talking about? And how should we talk about it? How can I raise this in a way where a lad will engage with me rather than feeling attacked or defensive? And I think that's, for people coming into this space or working in this space, that's one of the biggest pieces of advice I can give you, is to co-create, build with young people, don't just build for them.
Yeah, 100%. I've seen that so much over the last 5 years in the work that I do, of actually co-creating or group contracting what we want the space to be, how we're going to communicate with each other, what happens if we get communication wrong, how do we course correct, and how do we establish safety and boundaries? And what are those permissions as to what we want and what feels safe enough to explore, and what it's like to sit with difficult emotions, to sit with challenge or a difference of opinion, and how 2 opposing things can still be truthful and exist at the same time.
Yeah, and you mentioned the word soft skill earlier. Things like compromise, negotiation, empathy, the kind of spaces we're creating are absolutely essential for the development of those skills. And you gave a little brief insight into your experience at school and said, you felt like an outsider, you felt bullied, you felt you weren't one of the lads. I've had lots of workshops where a young man like that has actually said that out loud in front of the boys who he would aspire to be.
Yeah.
And the boys that he would aspire to be have actually responded with, I'm so sorry you've been made to feel that way. I never wanted you to feel that way. You don't have to be good at football to be a good man. And that's exactly what we're looking for, really.
Yeah, that's so beautiful to see that as well. And again, just as soon as you start, in my work, I call it modeling vulnerability, but I know in your work, you've rephrased it as being real with each other. It gives other permissions for people to respond in kind.
Yeah, and again, coming from a teacher background, especially an English teacher, I think how we frame language around this space is absolutely essential. So if we go in and say, we're going to be vulnerable in front of each other, we're going to open up, boys and young men have very negative reactions to that kind of linguistic phrasing because it
Yeah.
feels high stakes, it feels revealing, it feels like, I'm going to expose myself, and I want to protect myself from that. So rather than that, we'll go in and say, listen, don't worry, when opening up, being vulnerable, let's just put all that over there. Let's just be real with each other. I'm going to be real with you, and you're going to be real with me. Let's see where it takes us. And when you phrase, you're saying the same thing, really. When you phrase it like that, it feels far more accessible.
Yeah, 100%. And it is, we're just saying the same thing, but in a different way. Like, again, the work that I've been doing in different charities or men's spaces, understanding what are the mental barriers and the mental roadblocks for guys seeing themselves in a space, identifying with the space, or feeling they have access to it, and whether or not they fit into it or whether it applies to them. And a really big thing that I see in my psychology work with people is, oh, but I'm not as bad as that person, or I don't deserve to be in that space, or, maybe I don't fit in because of X. So like you said, just removing as many of those barriers as we can. And language is such a key with all of that.
Yeah, and that's a key part of the co-creation model. What are the barriers? What would stop you from walking into this room? What would stop you from giving up your lunchtime, even though you kind of want to, from coming in? Is it being laughed at? Is it being judged? Is it being shamed, humiliated? Is it the idea of exposing yourself publicly in front of other boys? Once we've established what these barriers are, how can we create strategies within this space to overcome those barriers or to remove them for you?
Yeah, beautiful. In all this work that you've been doing, because how long has Progressive Masculinity been running for now?
So I've been doing the work for 7 years, but 3 years of that was as a teacher. So it's been going as a business for nearly 5 years now.
What's that whole arc and that evolution look like over that time?
It's been a hell of a journey because I am not a businessman. I'm a teacher. I don't know anything about so taking this leap to leave the only career that I've ever known to, I know one thing about business, and that's you need a product or a service that people will want. And after 3 years of doing this, I was pretty sure we had it. It was research based. It was the impact was well articulated. The lads not only engaged, they actually enjoyed it, that's a big thing for me. I want boys to enjoy these conversations. Conversations about masculinity should be joyous. They should be, even when we're challenging each other, we should come out of it thinking, I feel better now. I feel good about these conversations. So once I was sure that we had that, I kind of took the leap, and we started off very small, just in the northwest of England, working around kind of deindustrialized northern schools like I was familiar with. But then very quickly we started to get interest from other places. This was before the Andrew Tate phenomenon. This was before TikTok took off. It was before conversations about masculinity became mainstream. No one was really talking about it at this time. So I think we grew very rapidly because there was not a lot of people doing this work. So we then started to expand into other areas. But when we started to expand into other areas, it became obvious that this work shouldn't look the same everywhere. So the cultural context is very, very important. Our workshop program in Belfast looks quite different to in Manchester, which looks different to the one we deliver in London, because culturally those places are very, very different. And the masculinity-based pressures that are in those places are actually quite different. And that has to be recognized within the program design. So we start to take on local guys when we expand into an area, look for a local guy in that area who has got a proven track record of working successfully with boys or young men, who can contextualize our work for that area, bring in his own stories, his own lived experiences. And so even though we deliver the same base content, if you were to watch our programs, actually throughout Great Britain, they're very different.
Yeah. It's just reminded me of something that you told me probably about a year ago of, did you approach I'm trying to think of the correct terminology, was it the Muslim Council?
Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, so obviously faith is a key intersection for masculinity, and faith is one of those intersections that can have a big impact on the way that you view what it means to be a man. We work with a lot of Muslim boys, Christians, Hindus, and we want to make sure that we understand that kind of not pressure, but that influence on you, and how can we celebrate your faith whilst also exploring the messages about masculinity that are wrapped up in there. So we went to the British Muslim Council, and they were great. We've worked with a guy called Yaz from Hotspot in Birmingham, who does specialized training on masculinity within Islam, and he's trained our facilitators to understand within Islam, these are some of the messages about masculinity. These are some of the misconceptions, which is huge because it's the misconceptions that people tend to gravitate towards.
Yeah.
And we've done that we've done that with Black African, Black Caribbean, I think we had tried to create training for our staff where when we walk into a room, all these different intersections that these boys represent, we have knowledge of all of those.
Yeah, amazing. It's so amazing and beautiful to hear that as well, because it's integral. It's so fundamental to how we actually relate to each other as a community, as men, as women, across all sections of society, no matter what our demographic is. That was a big part of me setting up my team with the work that I do as well, is recognizing who are the facilitators, how are people going to relate to that, and how are we actually meeting people based on their culture, their religion, their ethnicity. It's completely integral to the work.
Yeah, it is. And when people look at masculinity-based work, one of the kind of problems, or one of the things they overlook, is this idea that let's support boys and men, because boys and men are this homogenous mass. They all possess the same characteristics. They're all having the same problems. Let's design something to support them. You can't do that. You have to approach masculinity through an intersectional lens. So social class, faith, sexuality, disability, neurodiversity, culture, all of these things hugely impact the way we view masculinity, but also the way our masculinities are viewed by other people. So if you take race as one example, a young man who is white, a young man who is black, and a young man who is Asian, they're going to have slightly different masculine expectations placed upon them. They're going to see different representations of people who look like them in popular culture, which will influence the way that they view what it means to be a man. And that's just race. There's so many others. And I think even when I got into this work, I did not realize how vast and how wonderfully complex and nuanced masculinity-based work is. But I'll give you an example. So we were looking at a picture of a man in a wheelchair not long ago, and this was in a suburb of Manchester called Blakely. And the group comprised exclusively of young black men, so 12 young black men, Caribbean British heritage, and me. And the group was talking about the additional expectations they felt were placed on their masculinities as young black men, not being compatible with the idea of disability. And this lad said the word hyper. He said we have to be hyper aggressive, hyper sexualized, hyper athletic, because that's what we see as young black men. And what was really interesting was this one particular young man hadn't said much during the workshop program. He kind of kept himself back a little bit. But when we were talking about this, he randomly just blurted out, I'm just going to say it, I don't even like rap music. And we weren't talking about rap music. So obviously being a facilitator, I said, oh, wow, okay, thanks for contributing. Why did you feel the need to say that, though? Why is that important? And he said, because I feel like I'm supposed to. So, what he's done there, this is that place where masculine norms meet cultural and racial stereotypes and expectations. So he's scripted an identity that has prioritized safety over authenticity. So then the discussion in the group then became, how do you prove your black credentials? How do you prove yourself as a young black man? And they were talking about things like, sport, style, language, this performative aspect of masculinity that was rooted in racial expectations.
Yeah. It's so powerful, isn't it? Just these ideas or these blueprints or narratives of who we have to be to fit inside of a culture or a society or a friendship group or a brotherhood, and what that acceptance looks like.
Yeah,
as you're saying,
you can't demonize somebody for placing a safety first. Rather than he's not the problem, the culture around him, the expectations and the pressures are the problem. He's just adapting in a survival kind of in a way. He's protecting himself, and everyone can understand that. We just want to create environments where he doesn't feel he needs to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Where my head was going with it was through the lens of sexuality. Like, that's my experience from my own upbringing, understanding my own identity, and then the clients that I've worked with over the last 5 years as well. Very similar. If you're gay, lesbian, bi, trans, non-binary, asexual, all these different intersections of who am I, how do I present, how do I want to engage with somebody else, and what people feel they have to be in order to be accepted by a certain community. If you're not in one community, you have to be in another community. What are the boundaries around that? What is seen as acceptable or not acceptable? And how do you have to meet these external expectations in order to be accepted into a community? I see so much of that.
Yeah, and we're all looking for our tribe, aren't we?
Yeah.
And that's not a bad thing, but I think for us, so much of the identity of the boys that we work with at this age is formed horizontally. It's not formed top down. It's formed horizontally through peer groups. That's how they're forming their identities. So
Yeah.
what we're trying to do is we're trying to change the rules of the room. What are the rules of this room? If the rules of this room at the moment are, this is what it means to be a man, either conform or you're out, mister, then we're going to challenge it. We need to change the rules of the room to, God, it can mean so many different things to be a man. You tell me, what kind of man you want to be. I'll tell you what kind of man I want to be. Let's work it all together. So creating supportive peer cultures. Because if you remember at school, we could do an assembly on this. We could stand up in front of 500 boys and tell them this. They're not going to listen, right? Or they're not going to listen. It's not going to, the impact is going to be very minimal, saying that to 500 boys in a 1 hour assembly, because it's not going to change a peer culture. But if we've got the older boys in school giving these messages to the younger boys in school, I think that's the approach that we take. We're trying to change cultures from within rather than externally. So we say to the boys we work with, you're not broken. You're not here to be fixed. There's nothing wrong with your masculinity. You're here because the school have invested in you as leaders. You're going to be the cultural architects on this. You're going to go out following our program. You're going to go out into the school. You're going to work with other boys, younger boys who look up to you, and you're going to change the rules in the school about how we have to perform our masculinities.
And just how amazing is that? Just to empower boys and young men, to give them a voice, to give them purpose, meaning, identity, a sense of self, and a voice in all of those contexts. Yeah, wow.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful. And again, this comes from co-creation, but the boys don't want to be told. Everyone keeps telling them what it means to be a man, imposing and dictating ideas about masculinity. Like, let's not approach it that way. Let's say there's 4 billion different ways. I'm here to help you build it. Someone like me or you, we can inspire, we can guide, motivate, support, but we should never, ever be imposing or dictating ideas about masculinity.
Yeah. I think something that I see and I hear a lot of as well is the incongruence between what people say and what people do. And that's obviously very, very evident in the home life. What your parents tell you should do or should be, and actually do their own actions and behaviors stay in alignment with that, or do they completely deviate from that? Because like any children, they copy behaviors, not necessarily what parents tell them to do.
Yeah, of course they do. In our space, we call that intergenerational transmission of masculine values. And in our workshops, it can be a difficult place to facilitate when a boy says something like, well, at home, my dad says if someone disrespects me, I should just punch them. Or in my culture, disrespecting women is seen as okay. Finding the sweet spot where you challenge that without feeling like you're criticizing the dad or criticizing the culture. It takes a lot of skill to be able to find that sweet spot.
Yeah, it does. And again, it's holding like multiple truths at once, isn't it? And where's the care? Where's the empathy? Where's the need to understand somebody else's lived experience, and how you hold them through that, and how you cultivate their own critical thinking and cultivate the ability for them to think, I get to choose who I am. But again, how nuanced that is and how difficult it can be within a culture or a religion to think, okay, if I don't stick to these values, which my family, culture, religion teaches me, how am I not going to fit into that or be ostracized in some way? How do I find alignment where I can hold multiples at one time?
Yeah, and this is why, you mentioned critical thinking there. That's so important. That's central to our work, is get boys challenging sources of information, looking for counter arguments, looking for different ways of different voices. But if we take religion or cultures as just an example, so I've heard boys from Christian, traveler, Muslim communities, all of them say, use basically their religion as an excuse for some kind of, controlling behavior, especially towards women. Now, because we've worked with all of those faiths, we know that is a very selective way of reading that faith. That's essentially bias confirmation. You can read the Quran, the Bible, the Torah in a way that completely goes the other way, which is completely respectful of women.
Yeah.
And we've got passages from all those holy texts in our work that kind of show that. So let's say, are we using something in a convenient way to reinforce a belief that we already had, or are we brave enough to challenge this and say, I can be a good Christian and respect women, because that's in the Bible as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I really love the fact that you do that as well. You're able to actually reference the religious texts, no matter which one they are, and pull out all those beautiful passages, which says, what are the core values here? Do good, be good, help others. those are like, you reduce them all down. That's essentially what they're saying, isn't it? And
Yeah.
actually recognizing, how do we cultivate those values ourselves? And like, what's the difference between a word? So what's the difference between joy and happiness? What does that feel like to live that on a daily basis? What are the values that you want to embody? And what does that look like as an action or a behavior?
Yeah. And like, we said there's no one way to be a man. There's no one way to be a Christian. There's no one way to be a Muslim. There's no one
Yeah.
way to be a Hindu. I respect you and I respect your faith, but within your faith, there is still the individuality that you have to forge your own identity that is consistent with your faith.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. I love it. Can you tell us a bit more about the actual work itself? I know you do a lot of stuff around bridging the gap between who somebody think they should be and who they actually are, and how you actually cultivate that. What are some of the conversations or workshops that you might do around that?
Yeah, so the workshop program is 2 days long. So we're with the boys for 2 days, develop a very, very kind of close relationship with them quite quickly, a sense of trust, shared values. Every hour of our workshop program focus on a different aspect of masculinity over the 2 days. So within the program, we've got things like emotional literacy, gender allyship, masculinity in a digital world, relationships, and every hour is very practical. So, I don't want our workshop program to feel like school. I don't want it to feel like a lesson. We're not teachers, we're facilitators. This isn't, even though you're in school, this is not a school lesson. We're up out of our chairs and we're playing a game. And then that game is going to lead us to a really important talking point, or we're having a little side quest. We've got competitions going on against each other, and that's going to raise a really important discussion point that we're going to get to. So the kind of like approach is activity, discuss, and as the program goes on, we introduce a little bit more circle time. So, at the beginning, it's very, very practical, and we keep that practical element, but especially on day 2, there's a bit more, the boys are a bit more comfortable with each other. They're a little bit more emotionally literate now. So we can have a little bit more time sat in circles, talking to each other, challenging each other, drawing each other in. If I just give you an example of one of the activities we do, probably one of my favorite ones, one of the most powerful ones, it's called The Mask You Live In. So every lad gets a blank paper mache mask, and on the outside of that mask, we say, can you write down, lads, what you want the world to see when we look at you? Whether it's true or not, what do you consciously project? And then the inside of the mask is where you've got to be really brave, boys. And you don't have to read it out. It belongs to you. You can rip it up. You can take it home. You can do whatever you want with it. But on the inside of the mask, can you write down what you would not want us to see or to know about you? Because if we saw this, you'd feel weak, soft, vulnerable, snowflake, less of a man, any of those ridiculous words that get thrown around. So these 2 masks, which have been anonymized, all the safeguarding has been followed for these masks. These represent what we see kind of every day. I think when people listening to this, when they hear it, they'll be quite shocked. Unfortunately, these are not shocking. These masks are pretty standard. So the first one is from a 10-year-old boy who was in year 5 at primary school. On the outside of his mask, he said, I'm one of the boys, I'm fun, I'm fast, I'm chill, and I've got aura. 10 years old and he's got aura. What a legend. Same boy on the inside of the mask, 10 years old, remember. I feel like I'm stupid. Nobody gets me or likes me. I'm angry. I'm small and skinny. I'm always sad. So by the age of 10, he's figured out that those are not masculine traits, that if he was to show those or share those, he would be seen as less than what he needs to be. So he would hide that. This boy's 15 years old, popular, confident, funny, nothing bothers me, and sporty. On the inside of the mask, height and weight, I'm fat, family always arguing, I'm scared about the future, I'm sad, but I hide it. One of the best parts of the workshop program is when we say to the boys, like, now that you've done that, lads, you don't have to, but would anyone like to read their mask out, including the inside? And what you find is that about half of the group say, yeah, I'll read mine out. And when they read it out, you see every other lad in the room go, oh, thank God you said that. Like, I'm the same. Like, I don't like my body, or, my parents argue a lot, or I'm not as confident as I pretend to be. And it produces this really, like, I think brotherhood is the word that I'd use, this really like close brotherhood in the room. Because I think one of the, not curses of masculinity, I wouldn't phrase it like that, but one of the difficulties is we all think this is just us. When we look around, we think everyone else has got it all figured out, they've got it all together, and I'm the only one going through this. And when you realize that you're not, like, it's incredibly empowering.
Yeah, 100%. just that commonality, or the commonality of a lived experience, thinking that we're all alone in what we're struggling with and what we're fighting with internally. And as soon as you hear somebody else voice it, it's absolutely phenomenal. I remember once I was on a retreat that a friend of mine was running, and there must have been around 30 Muslim men, and I was the only white guy. And as far as I'm aware, the only gay man in that space as well. And I remember one of the gentlemen came up to me on the second day and he said, I need to apologize to you. I was like, oh, why? He said, because as soon as I found out that you were gay, I purposely, consciously said, I'm not going to talk to that guy. He's something that goes against my faith, against my religion. I've got nothing in contact or common with him, and I should distance myself from him. And then this morning, when you shared, you spoke my truth. And I felt such overwhelming shame and guilt of having judged you before I even got to know you. And I said to him, thank you so much for sharing that. I said, I really appreciate just the courage the courage it took for you to say that to me and just to own that. And I said, I feel nothing but love for you. And he said, can I give you a hug? And I was like, yeah, of course. And it was just this really beautiful moment, how we all have judgments. We all have insecurities or fears or worries about who we have to be, how we have to present, what we accept of others. And yet we miss the fact that we're all human. It doesn't matter about our differences. We all feel fear or worry or anxiety. We all have aspirations for hope and happiness and good health, but it gets so lost so quickly. And remembering that we are human is such a powerful lesson.
It is, and that's a really lovely story. His bravery, and because that was an awkward thing to go and confess to you, isn't it?
Massive.
Obviously, the way that you've received it, and the way that you've kind of made him feel held and safe in the way that you received what could have been quite an insulting, thing to say. The thing is, like, obviously, you're doing this incredible work with men. I think with my teacher background, what I saw was that none of this work is being done with boys and young men, and yet a lot of these issues we're talking about right now about belonging, loneliness, they incubate at a very, very young age. I mean, that 10-year-old, saying nobody likes me, nobody gets me. He's clearly quite a lonely boy. Yeah, and you wouldn't have thought that. You would not have thought that for the way that he held himself. He held himself as quite a confident, one of the boys kind of characters. But clearly that is the performance. And that again, coming to an education background, I thought we need to be doing this work a little bit further down. And that's really what your work and my work are very, very similar, aren't they?
Yeah, very much. And like you said, the work I do is guys who are trying to heal from all that stuff and all those years of like conditioning and masking and performing and posturing. And you are getting in right at the formative years when these messages, these blueprints, these ideas of who we should be are formulated. And that's why I love it so much, what you're doing, and just hearing these stories, because it doesn't matter what age somebody is, it's applicable to all of us. Even as a grown man, like how many times have I felt like I don't belong in a space with other men? My childhood experiences still influence me, not as much because I've done the work, I've worked through stuff, but I'll still get it every now and again. If I'm walking past like a group of like really successful men, I think, oh, I need to stand taller, or I need to project confidence, or X, Y, and Z. And I think, wow, I still have that fear or that anxiety or that worry inside me, even though I can recognize it and disrupt it and find evidence to the opposite of what I'm feeling.
Yeah, and I think the longer the conditioning's taken place, the harder it becomes to almost kind of overcome it, doesn't it? I mean,
yeah.
I don't know if you noticed there on those masks, but they both contain a reference to their bodies, and that is something that was so going under the radar. Where I reckon 75% of the masks out of thousands that we've worked with say something about I'm small, I'm skinny, I'm not muscular enough, I'm not good looking enough, and that brings back my body. And I say to the boys, I'm massively insecure about my body. I always have been, because I'm skinny, I'm slim, and I just can't put muscle on. First off, I shouldn't have to, but that's easy to say that. I went through a lot of my life thinking I need to muscle up here because I'm scrawny and no one's ever going to want me. That's not what a man's supposed to look like. And just sharing that with them and saying, we have, our facilitators have an I'll go first approach. It's one of the ways that we create that safety in the room. So if we get onto body image, I'll say, lads, I used to do press ups in my bedroom with my door locked and then try and flex in front of the mirror and absolutely hate myself for what I saw back at me. And then, obviously, because I've taken that risk they then say, "Oh, mate, I feel like I'm overweight, and I wag PE because I don't want to get undressed in the change rooms." We hear stuff like that all the time, and
Yeah.
just that "I'll go first. You're not on your own." Not only is it okay to talk about it, but here's how you talk about it.
Yeah. 100%. It must be so difficult for teachers to want to communicate things with children, but then recognize the limitations that exist within the education system, within the school system, within the religion, and all the different demographics as well. What have you noticed, or how do you work with teachers and schools to kind of combat that or evolve how they're working?
Yeah, so we've got 7 ex-teachers on our staff, and we've developed teacher training, educator training on how to have these kind of conversations. But we also have to be very aware that their professional responsibilities limit a lot of what they can do. And also we have to be very careful about what we're asking teachers to do, because teaching is a profession that is really on its knees at the moment. It's suffering a lot of fatigue. There's a recruitment and a retention crisis. We can't ask them to do everything. All society's ills fall on their shoulders, which is how some of them feel. So for us, when we do our staff training, it's really about this is what we do that works. This is how you can do it within your professional responsibilities whilst not crossing that professional line and not
Yeah.
being overly familiar. Excuse me, because being a teacher and being a facilitator are very, very different things. And I felt liberated since becoming a facilitator. I love teaching. I can see a future where I go back to it, but being a facilitator has really allowed me to model the kind of language that I want the boys to be using. So when I was a teacher, I was not talking to my classes about how I'd struggled with suicide ideation a couple of times in my life. It's not appropriate. I'm
Yeah.
your English teacher. There's going to be phone calls home from parents saying, why is your English teacher talking about this? It was also a Catholic school, which there was another layer of complication there around suicide, pornography,
Yeah.
certain topics than there still is in a lot of faith schools. So I don't know if I'd use the word restricted when I was a teacher, but I certainly felt like there was a line I couldn't cross professionally. Now, obviously, being a facilitator, we're still very aware of safeguarding and what's appropriate and what's not, but we can be more open and honest especially about some of the difficulties and failings that we've gone through as men in our lives, which then again creates that psychological safety for them to reciprocate.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. And then in relation to parents, what's it like? If I think about, again, my childhood conversations that were or weren't happening inside a family unit, were they happening inside a school, in religion, in culture? For so many parents, I think there's this fear or this anxiety about, how do I talk to my kids? What do I talk to them about? Oh, they're just going to shut down as soon as I bring up any conversation. But what stands out for me is exactly what you and I have already discussed through this, is that modeling of vulnerability. And again, that sharing of knowledge, of experience, of wisdom, of failures, of successes, of insecurities, and being able to talk to your children like they're adults, or like they're individuals in their own right, because they are. But so many parents see them as removed from their children, or children that need to be controlled in some way and not nurtured to develop that critical thought or that questioning.
Yeah, I think parents are desperate to have these conversations, but I think you've got to approach this. I'm a parent, and you've got to approach this from a very sympathetic lens. Did they grow up having these conversations themselves? Were these conversations modeled for them by
Yeah.
their parents? It takes a lot of bravery for a middle-aged man, a middle-aged woman, whoever it is, to try and engage these conversations when they feel insecure themselves. They don't have the confidence or the professional skill almost to be able to have these. But our parental support sessions are exactly that. How can I have these conversations with my son in a way that makes him feel safe, in a way that he will reciprocate and not run up to his bedroom or leg it out the back door? And a big part of it is the bravery to break that cycle of silence, of shame, particularly around high stakes topics like mental health, pornography. So during our parental session, I talk about my exposure to pornography was the local porn bush. And whenever I say that, half the people in the room burst out laughing. And you're like, right, you guys knew where the porn bush was in your area, didn't you? So I used to walk 10 minutes to this bush to look at this magazine, and I would get excited and I would get aroused. But those feelings of arousal were tinged with shame and disgust and self-loathing because of the silence and the taboo around pornography. And then I would get information from older boys who knew less than I did, probably, just making up stuff about, oh, girls love it when, this happens and this is what you do. And So, becoming a parent myself, I can completely understand why engaging a young man in a conversation with your son and a conversation about pornography might feel embarrassing or like you're not qualified to do it. But actually, that story is the best way in. Saying,
Yeah.
we didn't have phones when I was a kid, so I had to go and 10 minutes to look at this magazine in the soaking wet, and you had to leave the magazine back so the next person could look at it. And the lad's like, "Oh, really? You had to do that? Whoa, no way!" I said, "Yeah," and I was really embarrassed because I didn't know what to do, and said, "Now you got these phones and you got this access to it." So that kind of non-judgment. We're not saying it's okay that you're watching pornography, by the way, at your age, but I completely understand the desire. I completely understand the curiosity. I get
Yeah.
all of that, but I'm worried that the information you're getting is giving you a twisted view of what relationships, boundaries, sex actually look like. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, 100%. And that's it, isn't it? When we're not willing to have open, honest, awkward, frustrating conversations, then we self-educate through porn. It's exactly what I
Yeah,
did. It's what most of the people that I talk with throughout my life have done. If the education system is only teaching us the mechanics of how a man fits inside a woman, how to protect against STIs, how easy it is to get pregnant, but then nothing around all the complexities and the taboo subjects or nuances of sex, it's like, well, where do I go for it? Where do I go for that information, or how do I educate myself?
yeah. And where they go for that information are sources that don't truly care about them, that are giving kind of, again, warped views of what these things look like. I
Yeah,
think when it comes to parents, one of the things we say is just, as parents ourselves, we feel like we've got to be the rock. We've got to model strength and dependence and all these things, and we can still do that, but we can model the other stuff as well. Let's show our sons and daughters how to talk about. So if you've had a bad day at work, don't hide it. When you're at the dinner table or when you sat down watching the telly, just say, "You know what, son, I had a really rough day at work today, and I'm not feeling great, not feeling very confident about my job and how I'm performing in it." And we're not great at doing that. What boys say to us is, during like these conversations, your parents always want to know what your day was like. What did you do? What was good or bad? But they never tell you what their day was like and what was bad
yeah,
or good for them. And so obviously they have that vocabulary deficit. They don't have linguistic templates to use for when they have had a rough day. Just one example from my own life, and I'm not a perfect parent. I struggle with parenting. It causes me a lot of anxiety. I love it, but it causes me a lot of anxiety. But given what I do talk to my kids about this kind of stuff. And I remember I was taking my son Owen to his swimming lesson once, and I said, "Owen, Daddy feels really overwhelmed at the moment." And he said, "What's that, Dad?" I said, "Oh, I feel like I've got so much on. I don't know where to start. I feel like it's weighing me down. It's burying me a little bit. I don't even know where to start. I feel like running away and hiding from it because there's so much to do." I said, "Well, what are you going to do?" He said, "Well, I'm going to leave it to tonight because I'm not in a good place. But tomorrow, I'm going to make a little plan. I'm going to prioritize the things I have to do and get the most important ones done first." And he kind of, "Oh, right, okay." And he left it there. And then a week later, he was in the back of the car and he went, "Dad, I feel really overwhelmed at the moment." And I said, he was 6 years old at the time. I said, "Oh, really, son? What's going on with you?" He said, "Today at lunchtime, I had three different people that wanted to play with me, and I had to remember to eat my lunch, and then I had to remember to go and get my coat, and I just felt like it all got on top of me." And in one way, it's quite humorous, what overwhelms a 6-year-old, but in another way, that's his world, and he just that one conversation gave him the vocabulary to be able to express that.
yeah. So important. So, so, so important. And like you said, it's his entire world, isn't it? How do you
Yeah.
navigate social interaction and all the little jobs that you've got to get done as a 6-year-old through the day, where his responsibilities lie? Yeah, that's beautiful. That I've heard similar stories from that, from other parents and friends and family members who've got young children saying the exact same thing. As soon as they started changing how they were communicating with the kids started reciprocating in kind. And again, it's teaching them that resilience, the language, the narratives, and yeah, just opening up the conversation for them to be honest.
Yeah, but again, be sympathetic. Did their parents do that for them? Does it feel natural and normal for them? Like, what? Not only do we come from a non-judgmental place with the boys, we come at our work as a non-judgmental place with teachers and with staff, and with this isn't about, this is how to be a better parent, this is how to be a better teacher. It's about, through our work with boys and through the research that we've got about boys, this is what works. So, shape this whatever works in whatever way is best for you, but also kind of be brave enough to break that cycle of Otherwise, our sons and daughters will pass it on to their sons and daughters.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, just that weight of responsibility, isn't it? Of always trying to get it right. I was having a really beautiful conversation with another man yesterday, and he was saying just the weight that he felt as a parent to constantly get it right and to never mess up, and the anxiety that he felt when he thought back around times when he felt he'd got it wrong or he'd made a mistake, and then how he started communicating that to his kids, saying, I'm sorry, I should have shouted then. It's because I had a bad day. And again, just that little conversation just helps give the kid more context and more understanding to realize it wasn't them. It was the fact that his dad had a bad day.
Yeah. When we're working with the older boys in our workshop program, one of my favorite activities is we ask them to design the father that they want to be. So, we'll say just statistically, just based on stats, lads, most of you will go on to become a dad in the future. Now, obviously, it's not for a while yet for most of you, but can we start thinking about this dad that we want to be and start designing that man, and maybe think about a pathway that will take us to be that man? And one of the things I say to the boys is like, I say I have a lot of anxiety around parenting. I remember when my kid was born, and I felt, I've got to be like Yoda now. I'm supposed to be this figure of wisdom that's got all the answers and knows what he's doing. But I was making it up day after day. I was obviously taking advice from other parents. I'd read some books, but none of that really helped, if I'm being honest. I just kind of had to figure out, make mistakes, be brave enough to admit that I made a mistake, try and do better the next time. But what you were saying there about how judgmental we are as ourselves as parents, and how we'll be really forgiving and encouraging for other people, when it comes to ourselves, that internal voice will be, you let your kid down, what kind of dad are you? I really struggle with those kind of intrusive voices.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I think there's going to be so many people listening to this that are going to relate to everything that you've said today in today's session. What do you feel are some things that are missed in this work? When we talk about boys and adolescents and young men, there's a lot of misconceptions, but what are some of the things that we're missing or not understanding?
So some of the things you've already said, things like, lazy, reductive stereotypes like boys don't like to talk, absolutely not true. Masculinity through an intersectional lens. We're not a homogenous mass. Everyone is a complex blend of intersecting identities, and you have to understand that in order to be able to support and develop them. I think one of the things that is missing, like this thing that, lads don't care, lads are nonchalant, they just breeze through education and life. That's not true at all. That a lot of the boys we work with, they don't consume mainstream media like we do, but they are acutely aware of the political and social situation out there, and it's causing them a lot of anxiety. So once we get past that performative stage in our workshops, boys tell us things like, I don't think I'll ever be able to afford a house. I'm worried about the jobs that I want are not out there. I'm never going to be able to earn enough money to have the lifestyle that I want to have. And this kind of sense of hopelessness that permeates the narrative around growing up. It's quite hard to listen to, when you've got a 14-year-old boy full of beans, full of life. He's got this amazing personality, and yet he's already looking at the future, through this very pessimistic lens.
Yeah. And it's just the weight of society and everything that's going on in the world right now. It's not surprising that they're feeling the weight of that. Again, so much responsibility on the narratives of men, masculinity, being a boy, how do we grow up, how do we fit in, how do we provide, how do we appear strong. It always makes me think about when you got asked the question as a kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? I used to want to be Fireman Sam. I used to think that was amazing. And I thought, just having adventures and fire and rescue and blah, blah, blah. But again, this weight of thinking that we have to have the answer at such an early age. And actually, what's it like to experiment with things? What's it like to fail repeatedly before you succeed at something? And what's it like to have uncertainty around something and just figure it out as you go?
Yeah, and this idea that a man is supposed to have all the answers, and that you're supposed to have this plan, this foolproof plan. And again, I say to the boys that I was 21 years old and I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And I thought I might have to bounce around a few different careers before I find what it is that I love and what I'm good at. And that might be something that you guys have to do. Some of the boys we work with have a very clear idea about what they want to do. Some of them have got no idea. And both of those things are okay.
Yeah. Amazing. Are you based all over the country now? Because you said you started all over Great Britain. In Bury.
Yeah, all over Great Britain now. So we expanded to Northern Ireland this year. We've got all of Great Britain covered now.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. Honestly, it just fills me with so much hope, just seeing the work that you're doing and hearing the stories of these conversations that you have with boys, with teachers, with parents as well, and recognizing that you're working at every level to kind of bring better communication, better understanding, and better awareness as to how to develop and cultivate these young people into like fully functioning adults.
Yeah, I think that's what's missing. It's lovely to hear that, by the way. Thank you, because I think that's what's missing from the space is hope, it is positivity, it is aspiration, and that doesn't mean that boys who have poor behaviour and attitudes are let off the hook. That doesn't mean that at all. You can have an aspirational approach that still challenges, but there's a lot of fatigue amongst boys and young men about the way that these conversations about masculinity are being conducted. Masculinity is broken, it's toxic, it needs fixing. If you keep plying them with that narrative, they're going to gravitate towards figures, particularly online figures, who are offering them something different.
Yeah,
And
why wouldn't
I
you?
think exactly, I would have done. And that's part of the problem. The way that we're approaching as a culture these conversations, we're actually driving young men towards the very ideologies that we want to protect them from.
Yeah. It's did you see that sketch with Jimmy Carr where he talks about that?
Is that where he said they need better voices?
Yeah, so he basically talks about Andrew Tate saying we should learn from him. Like he's doing everything right because all these young boys are gravitating towards him because he's listening to them, he's talking to them, he's talking to their pain points. Yes, the stuff that he's saying isn't great, but not all of it is bad. There's some stuff in there which is actually okay, but we're not teaching kids critical thought, how to analyze what somebody's saying and say, oh, I agree with that. I don't agree with that. That sounds really dangerous. But like you said, there's so many positive men in society, but where's the visibility of that? And where's the connection and the recognition of boys relating to that?
Yeah, and masculinity in a digital world and masculinity influencers has become a massive part of our work. And when you actually sit down and watch these influencers, they are so skilled at what they do. They hit all these insecurities during this very difficult developmental phase that our boys are going through. Things like, I'll teach you how to earn 6 figures a month, how to get the girl of your dreams. Look at me driving a Lamborghini around Dubai. I grew up in a low-income household, and if that kind of stuff would have been around in the 1980s, I'm pretty sure I'd have gone down that rabbit hole just for pure frustration about what I didn't have, and someone's offering me what seems to be a foolproof kind of formula for success. And obviously, it's a hustle. Obviously, it's not reality, but I can understand why boys would gravitate towards that, given their experiences of the world around them.
Yeah, it's a no-brainer, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's what Jimmy Carr said. Jimmy Carr was right. He said the manosphere speaks to boys, and that's what we need to. They need better voices, but we need to look at the way they do it and actually almost hijack that, but with better messaging.
Yeah, 100%, absolutely. Mike, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on today. Thank you so much for everything that you shared, and once again, just well done for like holding that space, for creating that co-creation in the spaces with people of all ages. And I can't wait to see what happens in the coming years with this work as well. You can really see the ripple effects of just how it's grown in the last 7 years for you as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, mate. It's a pleasure coming on, and thank you for the work that you're doing as well. It's really inspiring.
Yeah, cheers, Mike. We'll make sure that we put links to your website and how people can contact you and find out more about your work and how they can inquire about you as well. But thank you again.
My pleasure, mate. Thank you.